Thanks very much, John. Yes, I'm Bob Levy. With me is my colleague, John Horcher. So what would it mean fundamentally for your business if you could take the equivalent of 35 to 1,001 combinations of different plots of data that you've needed to see in different places? If you could actually unify all of that, all of the different plots into a single context unifying view. So that's what we'll show today. So again, I'm Bob Levy. My background is in the technology industry, leading product for a number of larger companies like IBM and MathWorks, and also founding a local association for product management with over 6,000 people.
Good morning. I'm John Horcher. I have over 15 years of capital markets experience, primarily in trading, investment banking, and research. I've also done work between the buy side and the sell side doing alpha capture.
So what we're about to show you quite literally uses the immersive aspects of augmented and also other types of headsets. We quite literally take data and turn it into something that when it's immersed in space with you has created much more rapid but also more unique types of insight. Let's take a look at one of the aspects of the problem behind this. So if you think of just we'll start with a spreadsheet, say 12 columns. Traditionally, to plot this kind of data, we would use something like a scatter plot. On this spreadsheet, you're seeing the rows are stocks of the S&P 500. The columns are different things about each of the stocks. So the way we traditionally try to plot this sort of data is by putting something on the X versus something on the Y. We decorate the points or the stocks with size and color, and we'd very quickly run out of ways to show different factors or attributes of the underlying data. So if you were to use these conventional plots, you have a couple of alternatives. You could first look at the different combinations of these 12 columns, showing them as 4-factor plots. It turns out you would need 495 of those plots. So you could print 495 different plots, look at them all, arrange them in your office around you, and certainly it becomes overwhelming very quickly. Another alternative is you could put the data into a machine learning model. So we've had statistical approaches, deep learning, other approaches trying to unearth or derive insight from a data set. One of the problems with this, though, it's impossible to train a model to have your experience in what you do. It's impossible to train a machine to be creative, to have your intuition. It is also, once you've done this, very difficult to govern. So we've invented you can think of it as a multi-factor data point. So this multi-factor data point, it turns out that when you have something in physical space with you, there are underutilized areas of the visual centers of your brain that allow you to discern a lot more about that. So it turns out, for example, we've invented over 50 different effects. We've patent pending on how to use these as axes of data. And it turns out that, so for example, you can see, take translucence about a data point, or a glowing effect around them. You can actually, if it's physically present with you, you can discern these independent factors very, very well. If I show it on a flat screen here, you'll discern it less well. You'll see some videos. You'll see that point. We do have some headsets out in the outer area, and you can try it in the headset for yourself and see the difference. So we've also invented a number of arrangements of these multi-factor data points. So for columnar data, for time series data, looking at these points over time, and also arranging them in graph structures, and a number of other data-centric structures. Graph data being important for areas of cybersecurity, for example, or in the financial markets, counterparty fraud detection, anomaly detection, and risk management. One of the questions we're often asked at this point is, won't this all be a little bit overwhelming? Right, if you're presented with just so many attributes of data all at the same time. Autonomous driving efforts have already shown that people just instinctually, every time you get behind the wheel of your car, you're handling thousands and thousands of factors about many things in your environment. So consider another car in traffic with you. It might appear to be signaling, but really it's just braking and a taillight is broken. the driver might appear stressed out, and you just instinctually know to shift lanes to avoid a threat. It's raining. Perhaps there are wildlife, other threats in the environment. You're tending to a phone call, and all of a sudden a pedestrian walks in front of you. Instantly, you focus on the pedestrian. You know exactly where to focus, where to attend, because driving is something you've experienced with. And it's been our strong experience that people who have experience in their data can be brought to a point where they can be as capable in that space as well. So working with colleagues here on campus, we've actually found the correct math to quantify exactly what this means. So for every additional factor or axis of the new kind of plot we might invent, it turns out that the number of traditional plots we're containing within that view, that unified experience, that number actually grows geometrically. So for example, if you were looking at a traditional 50-column data set, to try and manually go through all of that data would take nearly a decade. It's just not something people do. And even with 14 or now 20 that we've implemented, of the over 50 we've invented, we're seeing people finding insight more rapidly, but also being able to comprehend things on an order of magnitude that they've never been able to even see before. I mean, think of the basics of trying to teach multivariate calculus when you can actually show students what it looks like. That's not something we've been able to do before. A number of interesting topics in financial markets. John mentioned healthcare, cybersecurity. So we're now seeing an example of a traditional plot, just a surface plot. It's decorated with one additional attribute, in this case translucence, using a Meta headset out in the lobby here. And you're seeing that an additional factor is able to be quite easily seen in space around this. On the flat screen, you're not noticing the subtle gradation, but from left to right, it's actually a continuous range of translucence that in the headset becomes very apparent for you. So this next example from the financial markets, these are the stocks of the S&P 500. On the x-axis, and this first cut is just a flat plane of data. So on the x-axis, you've the price-earnings ratio. On the y, you've the dividend yield. The size of each point is the market cap, and the color represents the price-book ratio. Just examples of how you might show something like this. We now make it obviously a three-dimensional plot by adding the price-sales ratio. And we now add translucence as one of many factors that can be used, or visual special effects that can be used for this process. You may not see it on the screen. It'll come across on a flat screen as just darker versus brighter. But in the headset, you actually discern translucence quite differently from brightness. This is being used. The more solid points reflect a more solid earnings per share. And now the more intensely glowing points, without losing the other attributes, the more intensely glowing points reflect a stronger EBITDA, the accounting measure of the financial strength of the company. Of course, interacting with points, filtering, all of the standard use cases one would expect, we go through with clients in detailed training as well. So we apply this same multivariate data point to a graph structure. This turns out to be very important for areas of cybersecurity. So you might imagine nodes on a network where now you can visualize many factors about each of the nodes. You have edges. These are the connections or traffic between the machines, and you can visualize many factors about each of the edge connections as well. So what happens in this kind of experience with real data, updating in real time, you're actually seeing potential anomalies. The human brain is really good at anomaly detection. So you take an expert security analyst, they're able to see patterns of anomaly that we haven't thought to train a machine for yet. So the expert is seeing zero-day threats when the machine can't be trained to find them.
This next visualization is an options chain, and the financial markets folks we talked to are very excited about it. It's the lumber market in one visualization at a point in time. What you see are 4 tranches of options. The z-axis is the maturity date, and as you move from right to left, the maturity date gets longer. Most activity, as most options traders know, happened in the last 60 days. You're seeing puts and calls. The orange and the red. You're also seeing a difference in shape. The taller objects have more open interest. The fatter objects have more trading volume. The y-axis is the implied volatility, and the x-axis going away from you is the delta. And again, this conveys much information about markets very rapidly to traders and investors.
Now, a lot of the work we do, we're not allowed to talk about. But some of the work we've actually been cleared to show. And as John was showing with options, you can imagine also superimposing, if you will, with different effects, the Greeks around options contracts or other aspects of the underlying security as well. So a very powerful way of bringing context together. So this next example, there's a group in Boston, Northfield Information Services. This group produces factor attribution risk models. It's used for each stock at each point in time to look at different factors of the macroeconomy. So oil price, slope term structure, interest rates, a few dozen factors that they found move stock prices. Their model also uncovered 4 statistically significant residuals. So after the known factors are taken out of price movements over time, what's left? So what should be left is what's commonly referred to as the random walk. So if economists were correct that markets behave perfectly rationally on the basis of the information given, these 4 factors or dimensions should be largely still. If common wisdom were right that it is all just a random walk, what we should see when we look at this is points just randomly blinking here and there in no particular order and in no particular relation to each other. So what's interesting is to view this kind of data set and see what actually behaves, and then start layering proprietary data on top to see what kind of connections we can intuitively find. So these points are animated from 2013 up to present day. Each point represents a stock. The shape and color give you information about the stock's sector and type of stock. In the headset, you would see translucence, and you would be able to determine by how solid the point looks in this example, how solid the stock's market cap is. X, Y, Z, and size of point are showing us those 4 blind factors. Again, these are the residuals from the model after everything's taken out. I think we'd all agree these points are not still, and they're not blinking randomly. We're not seeing a random walk here. What we're actually seeing is a very complex dynamic system. It's the type of system that's very difficult to train a machine learning model to find. Its behavior, the relation of these points change. Subjectively, though, at key inflection points, we see them, we observe them. I'll play out again. So they rotate around each other. They flip over one of the axes or planes. They rotate. Again, flipping and contracting, expanding. These kind of inflection points turn out to line up very well with what's known in the markets as regime change. And of course, you can imagine certain funds are very interested in what happens when you superimpose other proprietary data sets that they may have internally in-house unified with the context something like this is providing. So as an example, where we're seeing quite a lot of interest in the technology. So the workflow is fairly straightforward. People have data. Data scientists are often working in tools like Python or MATLAB. Other software developers are working in a programming language, and they work with an SDK. We make it very easy for people to define data sets and to see and interact with those data sets immersively in this new highly dimensional way.
Great. So we appreciate your time very much. There's fertile ground ahead of us in terms of data visualization. There are many industries and many companies interested in unearthing more of their data and visualizing it, as 70% of us are visual learners, we really see great things ahead. And again, we thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Woo!